Hello, the internet, and welcome to another episode of
80-bit Podsmash,
where gaming goes to grab a beer.
We're your hosts, Penguin
and Termite. How are you going to introduce our show tonight, Dan?
I am going to introduce it by... See, now I feel like boats. I feel like I should do a boat, but I said I wasn't going to do boats. And the only bit of feedback I've gotten so far is don't do boats. So, sorry.
So this episode is going to be our...
Cinnamon and Cardamom episode.
Cinnamon and Cardamom.
Yes, I've been watching, surprisingly, for those who know me and or may have known me before I got married and moved to this area, you would have never pinned me as one who would watch a baking or cooking show, but I have...
The Great British Baking Show?
I have been surprising myself by watching The Great British Baking Show.
Isn't that amazing?
It is surprisingly entertaining, and... Yeah, like I said, I surprised myself in watching.
Oh, it's so good.
I call it the Great British Break and Bake. So I'll go to Macy and I'll be like, I want to watch the Break and Bake. Let's watch the Break and Bake. And I'm surprisingly invested.
Paul and Mary are stirring somewhere. Mary. They're like, bake and bake, really?
Oh, what?
Break and bake.
They're rolling in their,
yeah.
In the future, they're rolling in their graves.
Yes.
But although I think Mary Berry is immortal and will never die. But yeah, I'm really invested in it. Although what I like to do is I realized yesterday that when they edited the entire show, they probably already knew who the winner was because they had shot it all. So I'm wondering if I can predict the winner of this season through just seeing how they have edited it, because they're not going to edit it in such a way that puts their winner in a bad light. So even if they actually recorded footage of the winner being like a crappy person, they're not going to edit it that way. They're going to edit that. They're going to cut that out, and they're only going to really show them in a favorable light, maybe like a dramatically tense, light.
Moment,
but they're not going to show everything,
like bad sportsmanship or like
so
bad attitude.
I think, because I know who I like the best, and I think I like her partially because they've edited it in such a way to make her favorable.
Season 1?
I just picked up where Macy was watching in season 3, I think it was.
Wow.
So I haven't gone and caught up.
Okay.
I'm just watching the newest season with her now. So I think I know who. It's not one of those shows where it's like you don't need to know all the like twists and turns.
Right.
Of season
Each season is its own context,
exactly.
like American Idol. So.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't feel the need to necessarily catch up to it. It's reality TV. So just watching it as it goes. So I think based on, if you haven't seen it, or for those who haven't seen it, I will avoid spoilers. But I think I just like doing the mental exercise of like, could I predict the winner based on just like the clues they've given me in editing?
Yeah. Because you're right, they're not going to do that.
Yeah.
It's funny.
So they might do it in a different show, like Survivor might be like, this jerk was a jerk and he won because he's a jerk. But you're not going to do it with the Great British Break and
the
Bake.
person that America loves to hate.
Yeah. But not in the Break and Bake. Nope.
So this episode will go live December 11th.
Mm-hmm. So coming up on Christmas.
Cardamom and what?
Cardamom and cinnamon.
That's perfect. There you go.
Because it's right. I don't actually even know how cardamom affects. You just hear words when you're watching that show.
Yeah.
And like they bake desserts with rhubarb.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how that's supposed to taste. Or
it's good.
Is it good?
Yeah.
Like.
Ooh, I have a funny story about a rhubarb tart that my wife had made once.
All right.
We just moved into the house. Got our first real big kitchen, coming out of the apartments. Alex has this fancy tart tray, which is a 2-piece thingy with the bottom, the flat part separates from the sides. Mm-hmm. Almost like a springform pan, but it's not a springform pan. The bottom just lifts out of the middle.
Okay.
Creating a ring for the crust end.
Yeah.
Right? So think of like you go through a ring. That's kind of how it works.
Okay.
The plate sits in the ring.
Yeah.
And it works. So she cooked up, like, from scratch, all the crust, all the intense, high-technique baking techniques for a tart. With fresh rhubarb, farmer's market, like, everything was from scratch and high quality. This was going to be amazing. So she gets me to pull it out of the oven. And I had never managed a tart tray in my life.
Okay.
So I think it's a pie tray.
Yeah.
So I reach under it, and I grab just the bottom.
Uh-huh.
Well, that ring that the bottom is sitting on falls down onto my arm. It's bare. It's exposed. 400 and some degrees. Singeing my arm. I have a scar, but it's so long removed now you can't even tell.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, it's right there. There's the scar. It's across my wrist. And I threw that whole tart back into the oven, and I backed away. Like, I just freaked out and ruined her entire tart. We scraped that sucker out of the oven. She was not
pleased.
She was not pleased, but she did well with not being angry at me.
That's good, because you were also in bed.
Yeah. I had no idea what a tart can was, or like that
Missy
thing
would
even.
never have let me live that down.
Oh my gosh!
I recently ate the last piece of a coconut cream pie that she had gotten. I haven't heard the end of it. She got another one recently, and she's like, "You can have 2 of these last 3 pieces, but you have to leave me the last piece."
Wow.
So yeah. So call her out. Called out, but you're not listening anyways. So called you out for not listening anyways.
I'm going to tell her about that. Have her listen to this episode exactly.
Sure, yeah.
So it's the holiday season.
Mm-hmm.
One more thing. I went to Walmart last night.
Oh, no.
So I'm trying to help my wife out. She's overwhelmed.
Bad choices.
She got school going on, all this stuff going on with life, Sam, my son, and all this. So I'm trying to help her out. She makes up a grocery list. She usually does the grocery shopping. But knowing that she's got to start cooking for the holidays, she sends me out so that I can just take care of that while she does school. And she can be home while my son sleeps. So I go to Walmart because I needed to go pick up an Amiibo. It's a gaming-related thing. I had reserved online, paid for, and had in-store pickup, so I don't have to pay for shipping.
Yeah.
So I went to Walmart to pick up the Amiibo. It was after 8. Their online pickup service closes at 8 for whatever reason. A 24-hour establishment with shelves that exist in this building where people who work there exist in the building can't go through that door after 8 o'clock. I don't know. So that's dumb. Mm-hmm. The store was a disaster, but it wasn't busy. Like, it was dead because it was like 9:30 on a Monday or on a Sunday night. Mm-hmm. And so I go in there, and you would at least think that they would care about their products or the presentation of the store. No, it was trashed. Like, the produce section was nasty and dirty and like empty shelves or not. They call it fronting in retail. It's when you bring product to the front of the short to make it look full when it's really not. They didn't do that at all. So like the shelves were decimated. And then I needed ginger beer. Ginger beer is a common thing, right, Internet?
Yeah.
I really hope that ginger beer is a common thing. So I walk up to this guy who's stocking shelves, and I'm like, "Excuse me, sir. Where can I find your ginger beer?" I'm in the soda aisle. He's got a whole giant pallet of soda.
Ginger ale? Like
beer.
Ginger beer. Okay, so alcoholic ginger drink.
Wait, it's not alcoholic.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's what you would make Moscow mules with.
Yeah, okay, gotcha.
So it's a common thing. It's what I thought it was. This guy looked at me like I had 3 heads. He was like, "What?
You mean ginger?" Like I just did. So yeah, okay.
Well,
I can't really judge the Walmart employee too much when I
ginger beer. And the guy was like, I have no idea. That was the extent of his customer service. That was it. He went back to his task. He didn't offer to find someone who might know. He didn't offer to fulfill any other questions. Like, he didn't follow up. There was no engagement at all. It was just, I have no idea, drop. That is the epitome of how you don't do customer service. And I'm sorry, but if Amazon is taken off the way it is and you can shop for things way easier online, the only thing left that brick and mortar stores have as a value is customer service. And if we're not fulfilling that need, it's gone. Like, I'm calling out Walmart and Best Buy. When I walk into those stores, those people have no clue what I'm talking about. And they should, because that's the only thing left they have. I can go online and find everything I need. I'm a millennial. I read blogs and reviews.
Got real. Cool.
Oh, and my mom has also picked up like 8 million things of meat that were expired from various Walmarts. So there's that.
Yeah.
The staff really cares about their products.
That's a whole different can of worms, expiration dates. But we don't have to get into that. All right, cool. So we're going to move on to DLC. But before we do, I want to kind of make a little disclaimer. Just kind of on the front, try to be sensitive to our listeners, our pod smashers, whom we love so much. So our topic, everything we're going to be talking about today is pretty much we're going to be talking about first-person shooters as a genre of video games. But since we're going to be talking about first-person shooters, we have to talk a lot about shooting and violence, and we're going to be talking a lot about guns, frankly. So if that is a sensitive topic for any of you because of the recent climate of events in our country, then this might be a good episode to skip. We want to be sensitive to anybody who might have strong feelings about that one way or another. We're not going to really debate the politics of the gun situation in our country. We're not going to really talk about the discussion about violent video games or violence in video games or guns in video games. That's not what this is about. We may and probably will have a future episode where we do talk about those things, but we just want to be kind of sensitive to anybody who might be upset by those things and just kind of get that out of the way that that we're going to be talking about that a lot tonight. So that kind of stuff a lot. So.
That's really smart. And I'm going to add another comment as well. Like, we try to keep this podcast family friendly, and we are going to be talking about guns and shooters, and a lot of the games we will reference are not for less than teen. I think teen would probably be the lowest rated shooter that we're going to talk about. So just knowing that if you hear a title and your kid, daughter, or son hears it and wants to buy it, maybe because we talked about it, maybe I'm thinking too highly of ourselves, but just to make sure that like most of the video games we're going to discuss are also teen or mature rated games.
I mean, I fully expect us to, blow up in a year, and so I'm sure people will be catching up on our backlog and asking their parents if they can buy Wolfenstein.
Right.
So, yeah, cool. So, just wanted to get that out of the way up front, because our DLC today is thusly. So, this is what I think I want to do. Pick a video game character that you think would have been able to solve their problems much faster if they had a gun. Now, what made me think of this was there was a great sketch I was watching online a couple years ago, and they were talking about the Game of Thrones. They were acting as if they were the Game of Thrones writer room, and one of the guys, there was a joke where he said, "I'm Jon Snow, and I don't know much, but I got a gun." And then he mimed like gunning down Joffrey, and it was like, so Jon Snow could have solved his problems a lot more quickly with a gun. So of course a lot of this is, this rules out basically all first person shooters. So we're basically applying like, okay, like X character who doesn't, Mario, like
he
Mario,
can just bust a cap in Bowser, like done,
like
give my princess back.
Peach is abducted, blah.
Bye,
got my Peach back.
And same with Link too.
Yeah, Link.
Like any medieval game. I mean, there's like The Witcher.
Yeah, I was gonna say The Witcher had a rifle. Like Griffin
Skyrim,
wouldn't have been so obnoxious.
Oblivion. Unless the mystical forces in those kind of fantasy games have enemies that can psychically repel bullets.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe like anything with magic. I could say would definitely. I would say that there's a potential of like deflecting bullets. But maybe they won't see it coming.
In Final Fantasy VIII, they have gun blades. There's guns built into their swords.
Guns and swords.
And it seems to have no effect on anyone. They're still slashing and shooting.
You can hit like X when they make contact.
They do,
A little extra damage.
And it goes, and the guns, like Barrett on Final Fantasy VII has a gun arm, and it does no extra. He's like mowing people down, and they just take some HP damage, and they're fine.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my first thought to actually answer your question was Mario.
That's funny.
Was like, give me back my Peach. Or any Nintendo character for that matter, because Nintendo notoriously doesn't have guns.
They have like,
what's notorious?
Arm-mounted plasma cannons, but not guns.
Yeah, the word notorious is like infamous, in that they're famous for not doing something, or it's like a negative connotation.
Infamous is negative. Notorious
is it?
I guess it has a bit of a negative connotation. Like...
So maybe I should say Nintendo is known for or famous for not having guns, because it's actually a positive thing that they kind of not go in that direction.
I suppose it's about your perspective,
right?
But we're gonna be talking a lot about perspective.
Are you trying to do like a twisty thing, like?
Yeah, like literally for those of you who
twisting
can't
my brain,
be a fly on the wall. I like basically just did like a head bendy thing.
This is why we need to have video.
Yeah, for the head bendies.
Yeah, for head bendies and video editing, we can actually twist the video feed.
Ooh, twisty
effects.
Yeah, can you like add? You're gonna have to edit an effect in there.
Oh, it'd be
like
cool.
A voice effect.
I don't know anything about video editing though.
No, I meant audio, like a twisty.
Oh, I don't even know
effect.
how to do that either.
Yeah, we'll find something.
All right, we'll figure it out. Just like the thunder that I did like twice.
Yeah, exactly. There's something in Audacity to twisty.
Yeah, we'll figure it
out. Do twisties. Cool.
Wait, if I make you sound like a chipmunk, does that count?
For an entire episode, if you make me sound like a chipmunk, I will burn you.
I won't even tell you. I'll be like, "Oh, Termite, do the last pass on the editing." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, sure, last pass, done." And you sound like a chipmunk. And
I won't notice
it, and you have no idea.
I won't notice it until someone says, "What was going on with that one episode?" And I'll be like, "Wait, what? What are you talking about?"
Oh, you just had the listening speed turned up. I'm sorry.
That's it.
But you sounded normal. Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it.
Did you have anyone in mind that would do better with a gun?
I didn't really. I mean, I did think of Mario.
Yeah.
When I was driving here, thinking about DLC. I did specifically think that I think that magical worlds would be ruled out just because of that exact point of the magical shields and stuff.
Right.
Being able to
they could repel
bullets. So
Sonic would probably do pretty well with a gun too against Robotnik.
Okay. Yeah.
But Robotnik usually has like these metal things around him.
Yeah.
Like whatever he's riding in. Because Robotnik doesn't ever fight fist to fist.
Nope.
Sonic does, though.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's our DLC for the day. Let's start talking about what we're talking about today. I wanted to talk about the FPS genre.
FPS stands for what?
First-person shooter. Really, this kind of applies to all. FPS can be a blanket term for a lot of games that don't actually even involve shooting. So it's more of just like an action
walking simulator.
Yeah,
that's what
a
those
lot
are
of
called.
walking simulators. Yeah, have the
first-person perspective.
perspective. So there is some nuance in this whole form, if you will. But we will just shorten it to first-person shooters, FPSs, and mostly focus on that. So I wanted to talk about just the kind of main things we're going to hit today. We're going to do just kind of a brief history of FPSs. We're going to talk about what innovations we think FPSs have brought to the industry, and which titles really revolutionized the form. And we're going to talk about the pros and cons of what we think FPSs bring to the table. And then finally, we're going to talk about whether or not we think that the first-person shooters have significant advantage over other types of shooters, like third-person shooters or 2D shooters. So, yeah, that's going to be our conversation
fun and exciting.
Today. Cool. Shall we begin with a little bit of history?
Sure. Let's talk about the history of first-person shooters. So apparently the earliest two documented first-person shooter video games are Maze War and Spasm.
Yeah, most of the research I saw seemed to indicate that Maze War was probably the first. And again, talking about the fact that many of these aren't going to actually even be shooters, Maze War wasn't a shooter. It was just like a maze. Like it was just you wandered through a maze. And
like Myst?
Kind of. It was a lot more basic than Myst. I mean, this came out in... I didn't write it down. I'm pretty sure it came out in 1980.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I Wikipedia'd it earlier, and I'm pretty sure it was in the 80s, if not 1980.
I've never played them.
Yeah, I've never played. I just saw the pictures of it, and literally, it's like the Matrix. If the Matrix is even more basic, like just green lines, but in such a way that it looks 3D,
oh, wow, yeah.
and you still actually tilt through the world from a first person angle. Very basic, but you don't have a gun. You don't shoot anything. You just, again, talk about walking simulator. You're just wandering through a maze. The whole point of the game is to get to the end of the maze.
Was it mentioned in Ready Player One?
I don't know.
Sounds like one of those games where you like type the responses to things that you interact with.
Yeah, except this was a 3D environment still. Wasn't super complicated, but it was a 3D environment, and it paved the way for the first person shooters of the 90s. So the first one that really took off in popularity was Wolfenstein. Yep. I didn't know that it came out before Doom, so that was something I learned. So that was in 92 when Wolfenstein came out, and then 93, Doom followed. First-person shooters for a long time would be referred to as Doom clones because of the popularity of Doom.
Yep.
Both of them, again, talking about violent games, they're very violent. The Wolfenstein creators, when they decided to do this game, it was actually based off of another game called Castle Wolfenstein, which was a 2D shooter, I think. Was it a shooter? Like a 2D side-scrolling. I think it was a 2D side-scrolling shooter. Again, correct us if we're wrong. But they wanted to do it, and if they thought, okay, well, what can we blend it with burgeoning 3D environment kind of world? So they called it Wolfenstein 3D. So it wasn't actually the first Wolfenstein game. But it was the first one to do a first-person shooter perspective. Yeah. They said they wanted to create a game that was loud and cool and fast as an action game, and they didn't want it to be slow or strategic. They just wanted to create a really loud, fast game. So that was kind of one of the first. That was arguably the first-person shooter, and that's kind of why they decided to create it. They kind of, again, blending a game that they weren't not even sure they were able to get the license for, but they did. And, they blended it with this, again, thing that Maze War and some of these other early first-person perspective games had started to do with the 3D environment.
To think about 3D technology was the limiting factor. It was slow because frames per second were slow. Because no one had done 3D games before, computers were still at the cutting edge of anything 3D, and to render a game in 3D was slow. So to come up with something like cool, new, and fast. Like today, we could come up with a game and be cool, fast, or you can make a slow one. Like, it's your option because the technology is advanced enough that we can just do what you want as a creator. Or back then, you were actually hardware limited. Yep. That's interesting.
Yep. But like Wolfenstein plays like a game that's cool and fast, it's
a toned down version of Doom.
It's significantly dated, but ironically, despite the fact that in Doom you're killing demons and monsters. In Wolfenstein, you're actually killing people, but I guess because they're Nazis, maybe. Just two interesting factoids I learned about it is, A, it was banned in Germany because of all the Nazi memorabilia and stuff, or iconography. But in America, it didn't actually have as much critical backlash as Doom did. Yeah. Which is really interesting.
It is interesting.
But so in the 90s continued to kind of rise with popularity. The next big one that came out was Quake in 96.
Made by the same people.
Everybody loves Quake.
You left out Duke Nukem on this list?
I did. I didn't.
That was one of the Doom clones developed by someone else. Like, they decided they were going to take that formula and make something different. And so Duke Nukem was a...
Yeah, it was there. I excluded it maybe because of my own biases. I don't hate the Duke Nukem games. I just
it was fun.
Didn't really play them that much.
I like
I also don't know what it added to the table over Quake.
Right.
Yeah.
I thought it was really Doom.
Quake was the first one that really took what Doom did and expanded upon it because it was made by the same guy. So they really kind of pushed the boundary. The next big one that I think really had an impact on the history of FPSs was GoldenEye. Yeah. I think that was, again, we've been talking a lot recently about how a lot of these Nintendo games, a lot of these games that came out for the N64 were, they weren't the first what they did, but they were the first ones that everybody knew. Yeah. Or everyone you knew had played them and shared that experience. Right. I think that was GoldenEye. That was GoldenEye for me. I hadn't really played much Doom or Quake before, but I played a lot of GoldenEye. So that was really the first-person shooter that I really enjoyed and that I got
That was behind. So early in the N64's life cycle that there wasn't a competing console that was doing that. I'm trying to rack my brain right now. I know Saturn had come out before the N64, but I don't think there was any... There may have been a Doom port, but I don't think there was any first-person shooter. Maybe Time Crisis? That's what it was. Time Crisis. That was like a light gun, rail shooter gun, but that's I don't know if that counts. I don't know. Maybe it does, because it is first-person perspective, and it's a shooter. But anyway, I was going to say that GoldenEye mattered. Like you said, it struck the popularity chord with the console market.
Yep.
Because PC first-person shooters existed. They had Quake 2, and that was awesome. Quake 3 was on the cusp of coming out, and that was way better than anything consoles could have done. But GoldenEye was the console shooter box that everyone had in their house, that everyone got together in their neighborhoods to play. Yeah. So definitely monumental.
Yep. And then the next one that really revolutionized the form, I think, was Half-Life.
Oh man. Yeah.
That was 98.
Yep.
And I think that one probably was really the first one that I didn't play Half-Life, so I can't really speak to it that much. But I think that Half-Life and Half-Life 2 really started to kind of push storytelling, showed what you could really do with storytelling in a first-person shooter. Up to that point, GoldenEye's story was...
Mirrored the movie.
Yeah, mirrored the movie, copy and paste the movie. Didn't add to it or make anything better.
Yeah, the story was told through dialogue. It broke the action, and it's the camera panned around third person, just like a movie would, where you see two talking heads to have a dialogue, and then go back to the action where it was first person again.
Yeah. Quake and Doom, Wolfenstein, they were all just any story that was present was just excuse for more gratuitous violence.
Yeah. So, and you would have to read the story between levels. Yeah, it didn't really happen during gameplay, and that's what Half-Life brought. Was that we're going to tell a story during gameplay, and we hope you're looking in the right direction, because that action is going to happen, whether you're looking at it or not. And it was really, really innovative and new, and no one had ever done that before. Yeah. So that was really sweet. Yep.
And then continuing the consoles history, the next big title, and I didn't write down the date, did I? It was early 2000s. Was it 2000 or 2001?
2001 was when
2001.
Xbox came out.
Yep. That was when the Xbox came out with one of their launch titles was Halo 1. And boy... That took first-person shooters to the next level. That really solidified the console market for first-person shooters, paved the way for your Call of Duties, your Battlefields. Yep. I really loved Halo. Halo 2 is noteworthy for being, I think, the first console online shooter.
On Xbox Live. Yep.
So, again, online shooters are now, people...
Halo 2 started the online console shooter.
You don't really play...
Which is the mass market appeal. It's the Apple, it's the Disney, it's the people who played PC games online years before Xbox came out. They were a niche market, niche, whatever. They were playing Quake 3 and Unreal Tournament, so that was ripe and awesome in that small market. With Xbox, it was like, oh, here's a home console that costs a fraction of a PC, and I can play with every friend in high school because we're all going to get it for Christmas.
And we're all
going
to play it
online.
online.
Kind of affordable.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and eventually it would become, the modern esports, which there's lots of money to be made in esports because lots of people watch it, and so there's all kinds of advertising and sponsorship and all that stuff that goes into that. So Halo 2 really paved the way for that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, and I think the 360 and PlayStation 3 era of gaming is just kind of iterative from that. I mean, nothing really fundamentally changed. Half-Life 2 did bring physics, like the actual hardware gaming kind of way of telling a story again, but this time having actual, like the gravity gun, you can interact with objects, you can stack in real time boxes to like solve puzzles or like floating things because they're filled with air. I have buoyancy, and like I remember a puzzle, you had to grab the gravity gun and go underwater, grab these air-filled canisters and lift a bridge or like a seesaw that was floating in the water, and you had to use the barrels that were filled with air to lift one end of it for you. So that kind of stuff was completely new. That was Half-Life 2 and Doom 3. Yeah. They both kind of iterated on that aspect. But after that, like I don't recall in my head now of anything that's truly innovative.
I would say Portal. Portal's another good one.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and part of the reason why I kind of stopped my history where I did on my notes was because I think like up till that point, the first-person shooter genre was still in its infancy. It was still kind of, like you said, it still hadn't really hit that mass market appeal until you hit GoldenEye kind of started it. Yeah. And then Halo kind of really brought it in. And then by the time, the Halo era was over, Halo and Halo 2, now it was online. Now it was like, then the forum exploded. And then we just had so much innovation in the forum. So in that vein, speaking of innovation, from that early 2000s and on till now, for the past 15 years, there's been huge innovation in the FPS market. Which innovations do you think have made the forum, revolutionary? I'll start with mine.
Yeah, you have a list here, but I'm not.
So I really do think that Halo. I think that one of the revolutionary aspects of it was the vehicle play, that seamless transition between first and third person perspective. They really nailed that. In fact, I believe in my research I found out that Halo was originally going to be designed to be a third person shooter.
Yeah, it was.
And then they changed it. Yep. But they kept some of it in the form of vehicles, and I think being able to ride those vehicles was just a blast.
Oh yeah, it was definitely awesome.
And really, again, it could have been really discombobulating to switch between first and third person. So it kind of did successfully when we talked about how Zelda really nailed that Z targeting and made it so that the shift in camera wasn't confusing to players. Yep. I think Halo really nailed that with the shift between third and first person. And we'll talk about that more later with Destiny 2, but I think, or Destiny as well, not Destiny 2. Yeah. With Destiny as well, they do that. Bungie continues to do that well with the shift between first and third person perspective, but that really started in Halo. The next one that I have on my list that I think really was revolutionary, that really innovated first person shooters, was BioShock. Yeah. Kind of really took that storytelling that Half-Life paved the way for and really made it an immersive experience. I think every moment in the BioShock franchise, it doesn't feel so much like it's not like, okay, here's the game part, now you have to do the puzzle in order to unlock more of the story. Everything about it felt like a story because you're wandering through these halls of Rapture or Columbia in BioShock Infinite.
It was the addition of the environmental storytelling.
Exactly.
Where like just looking in a certain direction was communicating something.
Yes, communicating story to you in a way that... So I think
and it wasn't necessarily, like you said, an action that was happening over in that corner. It was a sign that was posted that's ripped, or like a light that was cast on an enemy in a baby stroller of a woman crying, and you're like, she's weeping, but then she turns on you and like wants to rip your face off.
Yeah,
it's so scary all of a sudden. It's like those moments that aren't really dialogue heavy, and they're not trying to drive a specific story point home. It's the atmosphere, it's the environment around it.
Yeah. And really, I mean, it drew a lot of genre blending between sci-fi, but a lot of horror too. So really heavily, it drew heavy inspiration from a lot of the horror games predecessors. Which, in fact, now that I come to think about it, I didn't really add that many horror. I don't really have a ton of experience with a bunch of early horror first-person shooters, but I'm sure that they also contributed. Though
I remember like Amnesia and.
Were they earlier than BioShock, though?
I don't remember.
I don't think they were.
Yeah, I didn't follow horror too much. But there's Fear 1, 2, and 3.
Okay,
and then there's Dead Space 1, 2, and 3 as well.
Yeah, but those came after BioShock. So I know that BioShock's predecessors, the System Shock series, were heavily
System Shock too. Apparently, it's amazing.
Yeah, I've heard System Shock's phenomenal. And then the next one I would say that really came that definitely made the form much more interesting was Borderlands.
Yeah, Borderlands is
adding
awesome.
the Diablo loot style RPG elements to a shooter, just again, completely revolutionary, paved the way for the success of the Destiny
I
franchise.
didn't even think about that. I said the 360 PS3 era didn't really innovate more; they just iterated. That's actually a
Nope.
Yeah,
they completely
Borderlands, I stand
innovated.
corrected.
Borderlands completely again paved the way for the new hybrid of RPG and FPS that we've got that I think is working really well. Players are eating it up. So yeah, that would be the next one on my list. And then finally, I think that Destiny is we've already said it. It's super popular. It's at least gets an honorable mention for blending MMO elements.
Yeah.
The idea of raids and dungeons, expanding upon that loot
a shared world
system, a shared
as they call
world.
it.
Yep, an overworld that you can interact with other players with. Really, I think, again, it's a lot, probably where a lot of the future of that branch of. In fact, I would be surprised if the much hyped Borderlands 3 doesn't borrow elements from Destiny
Probably
going forward.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hopefully not too much.
Yep. And I think another honorable mention would be Team Fortress 2 and Overwatch.
Yeah.
The kind of character-based shooters where it wasn't about what gun you picked up that changed the gameplay, but it was the character you chose from the get-go, the character or class that you chose from the get-go. And then yes, your choice and everybody else's choice matters when you play together. So I think that really, those gameplay elements have really become popular in the form, and I think really make it interesting. So
yeah, Nintendo has a unique twist on that as well with Splatoon. Like it's your type of gun that you pick that kind of defines what role you are, which is not what Overwatch and Team Fortress do, but it also means the combination of the types of guns that you have versus the other team's combination of guns, and then shifting focus from shooting each other to we're going to cover the ground in your team's ink.
Yeah.
And then adding the fun games they have, like Rainmaker and Tower Control as well, that have to do with painting more than shooting each other.
Yep.
Where the shooting is kind of the secondary nature. I just want to call it Nintendo for that, because I think it's pretty innovative to take what's been extremely popular and very successful in the shooter world with Calls of Duties and Battlefields and etc., shooting each other, to that less attacking each other focus.
Less aggressive, yeah. And we will get more into Splatoon when we talk about third person shooters. So
yeah, that's true. Wow.
So,
I didn't even... It's not first person at all.
Nope, not at all.
Not at all.
Which also changes much about how the game is played. But
yeah, that's interesting.
We'll get there. Cool. So anything else you think? I know that you have notes in there about Half-Life. So did you want to talk about the innovations?
I already mentioned about Half-Life 2 with the physics and
cool.
adding the two. Yeah.
Anything else? Any other games come to mind that really?
Not really. I think you pretty much covered the gambit of the major upticks in innovation when it comes to first-person shooters.
Yeah. Let us know, Smashers, what you think is which games you think really revolutionized first-person shooters. Which ones really resonated with you? I left out a lot of Calls of Duties and Battlefields because I personally don't care for them, but for a lot of people, those games were quite.
I feel like if you've experienced Halo, which everyone kind of did, like Call of Duty and Battlefield isn't that much more of a stretch. Like Battlefield is just a bigger scope. Like it's
I will say
huge,
Call
like
of Duty
64-man battles.
Is it Call of Duty? I think that they do zombies first.
Yep.
Their zombie minigame I think is probably
in horde mode kind of thing. It came from Call of Duty. So
another one that came to mind after I had already made my list and taken my notes, but is another one that I don't have a lot of experience with. Is I might argue Left 4 Dead really good.
Oh my gosh, Left 4 Dead was so good.
The zombie, the zombie
4-player co-op, not shooting each other, but trying to get from point A to point B, and knowing the strategies of when the hordes would come,
and which types of zombies,
and which types when and where. Oh yeah,
it's
phenomenal.
It's a very couch co-op friendly game. In an era where couch co-op was starting to fall off.
Yep.
But was still a viable play option.
People who aren't what I would call super hardcore gamers were willing to go with me to spend money in public places to rent time. $5 an hour at various places to play Left 4 Dead together. It was so good.
You know what would be a good platform for Left 4 Dead?
What's that?
Guess.
The Switch?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, the Nintendo Switch.
I think a Left 4 Dead on the Switch would be excellent. Especially
it would be.
We already know 3 other people who would probably play Left 4 Dead with us on the Switch.
Yep, I would. Sign me up.
And I've been saying, I think the next big innovation, the next big game that I'm waiting for on the Switch is a good, solid co-op experience on the Switch. There are some I know out there, but that's what I'm waiting for, and I think Left 4 Dead would be, especially considering I haven't played them before, it would be a whole new experience for me. So, cool. Awesome. So I want to move on from talking about innovations to talking about some pros and cons. What do you think the style? What advantages do you think the style has, and disadvantages the style has compared to some of the other genres?
I want to start off with a kind of a funny note.
Okay.
How many movies have you seen that ever did a first-person perspective correctly?
None.
Yeah, none.
Well, there's some YouTube videos. There's that YouTube video with the GoPro guy, and he's like,
yeah, but that's not a movie. I'm talking about like a fully fledged.
Didn't they make one recently that was supposed to be really?
Yeah, it was the entire
fun.
Movie was first person.
I don't know if it did well or did not.
I don't think it did very well. It flopped.
All right.
And then Doom, the movie with Dwayne Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, thinking about that movie makes me laugh.
Yeah.
It was so bad.
Yeah.
And they had a first person like segment in there that was supposed to honor the game.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't work.
I never saw it, and I have no interest in seeing it. I heard how bad it was.
And the reason why I mentioned that is because that's a major con of the first-person genre when it comes to sharing your art or your story with an audience. Is that that's not the first thing that comes to mind if you want to have interactions between people that are meaningful or like an environment. I mean, I know that can be attacked because we just talked about some of the pros too, but they don't do it in movies.
Yeah.
And I know that it's a hot topic when it comes to books, which you might be able to shed some light on because I don't read a whole lot, so I don't know.
Do you mean like the difference between an omniscient narrator versus a first-person narrator?
Right.
Yeah. It's very interesting because even when I know in my writing, the sources from which I draw inspiration, much of them do a limited third-person narrator, where it's like, or a limited, they call it like limited omniscient, I think is what it is. And that is like, you're still speaking from a character's perspective, but you're doing it from a third-person omniscient point of view, where it's like, me, the narrator, knows...
You've blown my mind. Okay.
Me, the narrator, knows what's being talked about, but and knows all the thoughts of all the characters, but I might not, if I'm speaking from one character's perspective, I might not, as a narrator, say what the other characters are thinking and more focus on just what the one character is thinking and experiencing. But then again, it's not like I'm writing where I'm like, me, Jacobin, loves this person and I think blah blah. Like, none of that. It's all, this character is thinking this and this character is doing this and this character stabs this person through the face. So, that kind of thing. But you're right. Yeah, you have a lot to choose from and you always have to think best what serves the story or the experience you're trying to accomplish or create for your audience.
That being said, I have a lot of pros as well, but we'll get there. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest cons is the fact that you can't see your character, and you can't really customize your look. A lot of games doesn't matter. I don't really have to see the main character of BioShock. I don't really have to see the Master Chief, but game like Destiny, where there's heavily MMO elements, where a lot of the prestige of the game is what kind of gear you have.
Yeah.
Being able to see that and show that off is what I think like benefits a lot from having a third person perspective, getting to enjoy that. Same goes for Overwatch, for that matter. Much of
all the skins,
the skins that you've earned and worked for, you don't get to see them half the time. Much of the appeal of the game is derived from getting close to these heroes that everyone's got their favorite. I love Tracer. I love Diva. They all have their different heroes that they love, and you would be able to connect with them more if you were able to actually see them.
Yeah.
I don't know how it would translate in regards to the competitive elements, but
right.
That's a design consideration to think of. Is the fact that you don't really get to connect with your avatar when it's in the first person perspective. That's not saying that it's less immersive, because I think there's a distinction that can be drawn between like the immersion in the story and the immersion in the action. When it's first person perspective, like everything's going on and you do have a bit of that like, this is all happening to me kind of action. But when it comes to the storytelling, I think that especially if you're trying to tell a story and trying to really get into, like, connect with this character, all of the characters I love the most in any game, whether it's a shooter or not, have been third person. Like, Link and Geralt of Rivia, like, they're all, like, I get to see these characters and be these characters. But part of that is taking them in as a whole, as opposed to I'm inside their face plate. An exception to that might be the Master Chief, and I get that, again, depending on the experience you're going for, you might want to again, the Master Chief is meant to be you. Like, you're meant to be the Master Chief.
I was gonna bring that up.
He doesn't have a lot of lines. He's not supposed to, because you're supposed to be immersed.
Mm-hmm.
You're supposed to be, wish fulfillment in that regard. So in that sense, that's another pro. It can aid in the wish fulfillment.
Yep.
But I would say furthermore in regards to the cons is I have a hard time with first-person shooters because you can't really see where you are in relation to things. I can't tell you how many times I've fallen off a cliff in Destiny because I didn't know where my feet were.
Yep.
And that can be really frustrating for a player because they do all right with coming up with ways of subtly indicating where you're being shot from.
Yep.
And that's an innovation. I don't know what game brought that innovation.
GoldenEye, I think.
Was it GoldenEye? Oh yeah,
so.
Because they had the flash of red. Yeah. So they have that knocked down, but like they don't do the same thing if you're getting close to the edge of a cliff or if you're standing on something. So it's like there still needs to be some. I think there still needs to be some innovation.
We were just playing the other night, and I was like, "Crap! I just walked off a cliff."
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't even know there was a hole there.
Exactly. So it's like you can't really. Some would say that adds some challenge, but you can't really use that as an argument because there's plenty of games that have challenges that still have like intuitive mechanics. And then further, my final point in regards to cons is just the mechanics. The types of things they can do are limited. I do see that they're pushing more and more and experimenting more and more. Again, another game to call out in regards to experimenting with interesting mechanics is Overwatch. They're doing a lot with, I think the first character they revealed was Tracer, and the whole like warping and then rewinding time, like that was a cool mechanic, and that was something different with a first person shooter. But they have to try so much harder, I think, than some other games where the mechanics are not so limited.
Yeah, and we can go into. I don't really have a lot of cons with FPSs. Other than there are really, really good examples of third-person shooters or third-person action games that would not be good as a first-person shooter at all. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to start with that. Okay, so a pro of the first-person shooter is you have the filmographer, so to speak. Might as well say that's a thing now in games because
you have
3D space. There's a filmographer. There's somebody who's framing scenes who wants to limit what the player can see at any given time. Mm-hmm. You have that benefit, and you can raise tension by decreasing what the player can see. So that establishes more of a foundation for immersion, like using sound technology as well and sound architecting or engineering to what the player hears. So first-person shooters have that benefit. There's also a major increase in precision, I've noticed, with first person. Every single sniper rifle in every single game is first person. Yeah, even if it's a third person thing, because aiming down sight just needs to have that.
Even in a lot of third person games, such as we'll use the example of Zelda, like when you aim your slingshot or your bow and arrow,
you go right into first person.
It's not first person, but it's as close as it can get. Yeah, it's right over the shoulder. Mm-hmm. It's
And then Horizon Zero Dawn and Uncharted, which are PlayStation exclusive third person games, they go really close when you bring your gun. Mm-hmm. They call it aim down sight. Like it's when you press L2 or when you right click. It's like it brings your gun up to your eye. Yeah. In a first person shooter, it really there's hip firing and there's aim down sight. Yep. Those are the two things. And usually hip firing is a little less accurate, less precise. Mm-hmm. But in third person games now, when you press that aim button, Zelda, Horizon, and Uncharted, they all go super close. So you get this massive increase in precision when it comes to shooting. And so I think that lends itself to the first-person genre as well. If you were going to architect a new game, you were going to come up with a whole new idea, and you were like, okay, what do I want to accomplish? What kind of story do I want to tell? How do we want to... What perspective do we want to tell this story in? I think that if you are in the heavy dialogue, person-to-person communication, you're going to want a third person. Yeah. If you're in a heavy action title that's going to tell a story through environment or like music and where you're at and setting and those pacing, you can do that better in first person. And that's where I can quote like BioShock and the walking simulators today. Everybody's gone to the Rapture and Firewatch and What Happened to Edith Finch and those other ridiculously good games. They're all first person, even though they don't have a gun. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So that's the pros to the first-person genre. Is the full immersion. And one more thing was what you had mentioned with Master Chief, is you have the option of making the first person you, the player. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Whereas a third person, you don't. Because you see the butt end of this person the whole way through the game. You know that's not you.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. There was something you said that made me think of, I think it has to relate to the filmography. And I will say this is, I think, another con of the first-person genre, which is it's meant to be your, like you said, it's meant to be your perspective. It's meant to be what you see and how you interact with life. I'm talking to you right now from a first person perspective. The only problem is there are things about your senses and the way that we do first person perspective in real life that games can't simulate. For one, a game so far has not been able to really simulate peripheral vision.
Right.
And for two, the other big sense that comes into play with our perception is proprioception. It's one of those like subsenses where we sense our surroundings because we just sort of feel. I feel that there's kind of something around my general area. It's what a lot of people refer to as that sixth sense. Yep. It's called proprioception, and it's our ability to it's our body's way of basically like feeling its
games
relation
can't do
in
that.
space. Yeah, you can't do that. So what ends up happening a lot with first person perspective games is you get these weird things where you can tell the developers are really trying to make it seem like a first person perspective, and oftentimes it can bring me out of the experiences. I'm like, that just kind of looks dumb. I mean, even the idea of holding you don't hold a gun here. You don't hold a gun, even though it's firing from the hip. Like in a real life scenario, you're gonna sometimes aim down the sights with a gun, and you're sometimes gonna be firing from the hip, but you detect that through proprioception and peripheral vision. You don't do that,
right? But there's no way to replicate
that. You can't do that
in
in a game, so it ends up just looking silly. You holding the gun kind of like basically where your chin is what a lot of first person games look like. And then if they do anything else, like my character's reaching, but if I'm reaching for this computer, I'm again using my proprioception, using my peripheral vision, and it doesn't look the same way in a game. It would be like I would put the arm in front of my face, my nose, and then reach to grab it. And that's what it looks like. So it can be killing the immersion from that filmography perspective when they try really hard to replicate how that would be. Whereas in a third person game, the character would you'd have a brilliant mocap actor like A-Ray just do that, and then that's all they have to do. So it can be, I think that can be a limiting factor of first person shooters. So with all of those cons in mind, and the advent of third-person shooters, which, by the way, we will define as games that involve shooting and involve that XY axis, but being from a zoomed-out point of view, usually with the camera behind the player avatar, but with their relatively full body or most of their full body in sight. That is what we'll define as third-person shooters. Think of games, the early games that really did it were like Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, was one of the earliest third-person shooters. The Mass Effect franchise does a lot of third-person shooting, and so does Gears of War. That was the one I was trying to think of.
Oh, yeah. That's
very
third-person.
Very third-person heavy, yeah.
Metal Gear Solid?
Yep. Yep. A lot of Hitman. There's a lot more than I realized when I was thinking about it.
Yeah.
Later titles, Splatoon, really brought that into the competitive third-person shooters, into the competitive
arena style.
Yep. So with the advent of third-person shooters, do you think that there's anything beyond a stylistic choice? Because that's always going to come into play. Is developers have their right to exercise their stylistic or artistic choice, but with the advent of innovations in third-person shooters, do you really think that the first-person shooter is like the first-person perspective is necessary? That it brings something to the table that third-person shooter can't?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think there's totally a viable space for both.
Okay.
They both need to exist.
All right.
The first-person perspective offers the player a chance to experience two things. There's two different options you can go. If you're going to choose a first-person thing, you're going to completely flesh out who the character is, and you're going to see the game or perceive the actions of the game through that character's eyes. Mm-hmm. And you're going to have who the character is plus the experience combined into your experience. The option B is that the character is completely not fleshed out at all, and you have no idea who this person is, and you're going to transcribe yourself onto
fill in the
them,
gaps. Yep,
which is what you were saying with Halo. And a question you can highlight that is: would Gordon Freeman from Half-Life be as iconic as he is if Half-Life and Half-Life 2 were designed and developed to be third person? I don't think so. Because Gordon Freeman's not a fully fleshed out character. You know just enough about him, and then people identify themselves in that role, and then they just become a fan of Gordon Freeman, but really they're a fan of their own experience that they've put into Half-Life, and they kind of throw that onto Gordon Freeman. So when someone has the picture of the iconic crowbar, they're like, yeah, Half-Life's amazing, but really it's their own story of what they've done in the various Half-Life games that have made them have that reaction to the crowbar.
I would counter to that by saying the same logic can be applied to Link, though. Link doesn't talk.
That's
he
true.
doesn't have a personality. He's meant to be wish fulfillment. He's meant for you to imbue and fill in the gaps of your personality. And being a third person perspective doesn't really ruin that, because even in those first person games, you still get shots of Gordon Freeman. You still get to see the scruffy, scraggly face. In Halo, you may not get to see the face under the mask, but you still get to see Master. You know that you don't look that good in Master Chief armor. Yeah. So there are still in both games, in all those games.
It's
there are still
weird that
moments.
there's just enough boundary to like fuzz that threshold so that you still do identify. Like there's a level of like, and this is where my argument is with third person. Third person to me is the best when you want to fully flesh out who a character is, completely define their roles, and actually limit who they are. Because you can see them. And like you want, like watching a movie, when you watch James Bond, you know who James Bond is, you know what he's capable of and his limits, and you're going to watch that with the expectation that he's not going to do anything weird, like fire a fireball into the sky.
I would counter that, though, by saying Splatoon is a third-person shooting game that's, again, you're meant to kind of own and customize your little splatling. They don't have personalities. They don't have...
It's supposed to be you.
They don't. Yeah, it's supposed to be a squid version of you, and that game is super successful. Furthermore, it breaks the whole trend of like, okay, I could see where an argument would be made that third person is better at the storytelling, but first person is better at the competitive multiplayer. Splatoon blows that out of the water.
Yeah, I wasn't even going to make that argument. But
it's an argument that I was thinking through in my head. I was like, oh yeah, that could be said, but then you have great competitive multiplayer game like Splatoon that is not very story heavy. It's just meant for you to.
But if you had that if you took Splatoon, the single player is the weakest link. Like it's fun. It's
sure,
cool
but
to go
single
through
player
the puzzles.
Single player is the weakest link in Call of Duty and Battlefield as well.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. Is like there's I'm not sure that first person shooters bring anything to the table that a third person game couldn't, and therefore it just comes down to being a stylistic choice. Just because of how the XY axis has evolved in games to now be really effective, you can still get a lot of precision out of the third person perspective. And yes, at points in time, you're going to want to zoom in to a first-person perspective while playing a third-person game.
For that precision, but that's a mechanical thing.
But the same is then true with a lot of first-person shooters. They sometimes zoom out to the third-person perspective for moments
Vehicles.
too. Exactly,
Flying.
vehicles and the biggest, again, one of the reasons that got me thinking about this was the biggest, most like weird design decision for me in Destiny 2 is there's a point where you like pick up a really big gun and it goes out in the third person perspective, and I was like, wow, this is really fun. I just want to carry this gun around and shoot, or even the swords. Like I want to pull out my sword because I actually, there are points of time where I'm playing Destiny and I'm like, oh, I want to pull out my sword just so I know where I'm going, so I can see where I'm landing and stuff. And I was like, wow, does this game really benefit more from a first-person perspective? You can apply that question to, would Splatoon be a better game as a first-person shooter? I don't know. Maybe, but I like it as a third-person game. So this isn't to say that I dislike first-person shooters and don't think they should make any more. I think that it's interesting to consider, like, other than a stylistic choice. I will say that a coworker did bring up a point when I talked to him about this before we came, because I knew he was a fan of FPSs. And what he did say was, there are challenges that FPSs have that you wouldn't necessarily have the same experience in a third-person shooter. So there are some competitive challenges that FPSs bring to the table, such as you can't see around corners. Again, you can't always see, that whole thing that I was complaining about of I can't see where I'm going sometimes. That can be advantageous in a competitive arena that you don't always get. I would say that that's not like a make it or break it thing. I think that if we were to abandon the first person model and just have third person shooters from now on, I think they'd find a way to make them still challenging and surprising.
If that was the only thing.
But exactly.
My last argument, and you might be able to poke holes in this one too, is if you took any of the walking simulators, which are complete story driven environmental storytelling experiences, and made them third person, I think they would break. Every one of them. Okay. I don't think you would have the same experience whatsoever. And I don't know if you've played any of them recently. I most recently played Firewatch, and prior to that was Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. I think I've talked about those on this podcast before, and they're just monumental, amazing experiences.
Yeah, you can find exceptions and holes in anything, I would say that.
But if you take Splatoon, that's a good point. If you made Splatoon a first-person shooter, would it still be what it is?
That's fun, yeah, and it's interesting. I would say that a walking simulator that I know is successful from a third-person perspective is Journey.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So it's doable. Again, that's the whole point. Is it's doable, but again, I will water down my own argument by simply saying like that's the whole beauty of this idea that you can do. Game developers they don't have to be beholden to anything. So really getting to see how they will experiment with the form going forward. I hope they continue to experiment with it and just kind of find, where are moments. What if we had a shooter that was like equal parts third person and first person shooter, and it just did like, here are the best moments of that this game is meant to be enjoyed as a first person shooter, and here are the best moments where it's meant to be enjoyed as a third person shooter. If Destiny has another installment, I'd like to see them like allow you to toggle third person or first person mode, kind of like how Skyrim does it, but like less the advantage. Like Skyrim's still meant to be played as a first person perspective game, so I would like the ability to toggle it, but also still make it balanced and fun to play from a third person, which they already have the basis of that there. Like a lot of those guns you can use in a third person perspective and not lose any of that gameplay. So I would even maybe like to see that in Borderlands as well, if they do that, if they would do that in Borderlands.
I mean, Uncharted and Horizon are the two that speak out the most to me that do it perfectly.
Yeah.
Third person with the shooting mechanic.
Yep.
And then Splatoon on the Nintendo side for the online arena
and when
shooters.
you need precision, it brings you into a close mode. Yeah.
You said Skyrim, that reminded me. Oblivion, which is Elder Scrolls 4, and Skyrim. I wanted to so bad to love those games. I couldn't.
Yeah.
And I think it actually comes down to this perspective. Is because they come off as first-person shooters, which I didn't like, so I zoomed out, and it felt off. Because they were developed for first-person perspective.
And then compare that to, like, The Witcher.
The Witcher 3,
Yep.
which I freaking love. And I played through the entire thing. I probably sunk over 100 hours into Witcher 3.
Yeah, it's basically Skyrim, but better.
Yeah, and it was like the difference in... With Skyrim and Oblivion, the character is... Every aspect of that character is completely customizable based on what you do.
Yeah.
Or with the third-person perspective, Geralt of Rivia, he was a defined character with a name who had 2 swords and a limited capacity for magic that you could kind of tweak how you wanted, but still like 4 avenues of magic that you could optimize in, and that was it. We're like Skyrim and Oblivion where, no, you are that character, which is why they chose first person, and I can see that as to why they did. Mechanically off, and it broke my love for the game, despite my wanting and yearning to try. And Mass Effect was another game that was the same way. I wanted to love it so bad. I don't think that was because of the perspective, it's just because it was boring. But with Skyrim and Oblivion, I really do think it was the first person, third person perspective, and that's the only video game example, because I've played every game we've talked about tonight, and they all feel good in their perspectives. Like they feel good. They
feel right. Like it's right. This is how that game is meant to be played.
Except for Skyrim and Oblivion, which is like, it's kind of telling, and it speaks more volumes to like trying to figure out what the point of the first person perspective is versus the third person and those things.
Cool. Awesome. All right, I think that's all the time we have for tonight. We're wrapping up here at around an hour. So, let us know what you guys think. Do you guys like first-person shooters? Do you not like first-person shooters? What do you think of the first-person perspective in video games? Where would you like to see the form go in the future? Tell us if we're just flat out wrong on anything. And tell us let us know what your opinions are.
How about a first-person fighting game? This is where you just say no.
You
just look at me with a straight face and you go, no.
No, that's okay. That's okay, Termite.
Yeah, but a first-person racing game,
they happen. Yeah,
they're out there. They're so good. But some people don't like the third person or the first person, and they zoom out. You can see the car on the track.
Yep.
I don't personally do that.
Cool.
I like the precision of... That's another side note.
Yeah.
So let us know.
Let us know what your thoughts are.
Apparently, there was a glitch with the Reddit that I've now fixed where no one could post. I didn't realize that was as a moderator. I had it locked down to private. And so now it's open for everyone to post on. Luckily to my brother, call him out. He's a Podsmasher. He's awesome, who let me know. So please go to our subreddit and you can engage in conversation there. Start up a thread about first person versus third.
And in the spirit of call outs and smasher feedback, I will say a Podsmasher pointed out how we talked about Allison Hannigan in episode 4 with Kristen and didn't mention How I Met Your Mother. So this is us mentioning How I Met Your Mother. I still stand by my statement, though, that Allison Hannigan has played only 2 roles. Willow and not Willow. So the How I Met Your Mother role is just an example of a not Willow.
And I can't speak to that at all.
We will.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I'm just offering feedback or offering responsive feedback. I want to encourage more people to engage in conversation with us. So,
I regularly peruse Twitter, and I will share things I either don't like or thought-provoking stuff. I'll retweet those things. I interact with the larger gaming industry and some of the talking heads and podcasts that I listen to. So if you follow us at 80-Bit Podsmash, you might see some cool things that normally you wouldn't be exposed to. So hit us up there. Feel free to reply and retweet things, or argue with me on there, and Facebook as well. So we're there. We're on all the social media platforms. Hit us up.
All right, Podsmashers. We will miss you until next time.
This has been an 80-Bit production of 80-Bit Podsmash.